This morning, it's official. Council taxpayers in York are to pay more. City councillors last night agreed an increase of 2.9%, as well as cuts of almost £20 million from their budget over the next 2 years. One of my guests in a few moments' time was thrown out of that meeting last night after he shouted from the public gallery. Here's what happened.
Please sit or have you removed from the chair. Please sit down. Sit down. Be prepared to be removed. If you are going to stop the meeting, remove that gentleman from the public gallery. Has got you to remove that from the public gallery now. So I ask that the council takes us back. Remove him from the public gallery, please, altogether. Altogether. I said that at the beginning, and he's obviously taken no notice.
Well, that happened last night. With me in the studio is the Deputy Leader of the City of York Council, Tracey Simpson-Laing, and Mark Bentley from York Stop the Cuts. Good to see you both. Thanks for coming in this morning.
Good morning.
Tracey, is this the right decision then to increase the council tax by 2.9%?
We had some very hard choices to make this year, and one of them was making sure that we protected services for vulnerable people, and if we hadn't have done what we did last night, then we wouldn't have done that.
Mark, do you agree with that?
Well, I'm here representing York Stop the Cuts, and we have no position on council tax because we are an anti-cuts campaign. But what I will say on the issue is unless there's a government guarantee of extra money to freeze council tax this year and next, then the council has the choice either to raise council tax this year or next year or implement even more cuts. But I think what I want people to remember is that for the last few years people have had a pay freeze or even a pay cut, and so this council tax rise is just another example of people of York being forced to pay for the crisis that's actually caused by bankers.
You were thrown out of the meeting last night, though. Why did you try and disrupt it?
Right. Well, the reason I tried to disrupt it was actually just to give a very visual example of what more and more people are going to have to do if they want to oppose this government. In order to be thrown out of the meeting, what I did is I stood up in the public gallery and started speaking, which is something you're not allowed to do, and the Lord Mayor was very strong and shouted over me, but I started by complimenting the Lord Mayor, actually, who was much more sensitive to the public speakers this year than last year's Liberal Democrat Lord Mayor. But then I moved on to say to the council that they need to take a stand against the central government.
Which is fair enough, but there are ways of doing it. You are allowed as a member of the public to address councillors for up to 3 minutes prior to a budget meeting starting. So why didn't you use the proper channels and use the 3 minutes to address the councillors?
Well, the council obviously is given a certain amount of flexibility of power in the local area to rule and to try and deal with the cuts. What I'm saying is they're not given enough, just in the same way as I believe the public are not being encouraged enough and given enough chance to be in control of their own lives politically and in companies. Also, the council is not given enough power to rule in their local area to be able to deal with the cuts in a sensible way.
Okay, just briefly, because I'll come back to the question, because like an MP you didn't answer the question. Why didn't you use the 3 minute opportunity where you can, quite according to the rules, challenge the councillors? Why did you have to stand up in the gallery and cause a kerfuffle?
Well, I will commend those who did use that 3 minute opportunity. There were some extremely good speeches made, particularly about the threat of privatisation during that time. And
so why didn't you use the 3 minutes?
Because I wanted to give that visual example. Otherwise,
Thank you. That's an answer. Excellent. Yes. Now, you see, you've criticised James Alexander, who is a Labour leader of the council, for some measures in the budget. Now, we asked James if he could persuade you what he and his Labour group are doing for the best in the circumstances that they've found themselves. Here's his reply.
I don't think I can, if I'm being honest. They don't want to see any cuts, but I understand their sentiment. But we have a hand dealt to us by central government, and we have to deal with that in the fairest way possible. Their battle is with the government. It's not with the council who are administering the situation.
Tracey Simpson-Laing, can I come to you? Did the council really need to put the council tax up? Because the York budget included a provision, didn't it, for £1.7 million in pay increases. This is over 2 years. But a national freeze in public sector pay was announced yesterday. Now, the council tax increase will bring in an extra £1.8 million. The government grant, which was on offer, was £1.8 million. Now, in the scheme of things, it all more or less cancels each other out. So what are you now going to do with the extra cash that you're going to have from not having to give anyone a pay rise.
Well, the actual level of pay increase in there was actually 400,000. There are actually increments in there which are part of people's contracts. So we do have to separate that money out. It was actually 400,000 that's going to be the difference. The money.
But you didn't have to put the council tax.
I'm getting to that.
I put this point to James Alexander yesterday and he said we can't crystal ball gaze here.
No,
but then lo and behold, this happens.
We can't crystal ball gaze because the fact is the government have made it very, very clear that the 1.8 million they were offering was a 1-year deal only. So it would mean next year putting council tax up by 4, 5, 6% or cutting even more services. Now people are telling us they don't want those services cut. They actually want the services increased. So, that's where we have difficulty. If you look at other councils, they've shut libraries, swimming pools, children's centres. We have not done that. So that's the hard choice. We've made those choices and we think York residents will actually be better off.
Well, the Lib Dems, the Greens, the Conservatives have all condemned your budget. Here's Carol Runciman, Andy DeGorn and Ian Gillis, respectively.
I think it will create a lot of problems. The cuts do have to be made, but it's where they're made and how they're made that's important. It's preparing people for them, particularly in the voluntary sector, and it's recognising that the voluntary sector gives very good value for money, and that's where we should be investing.
It will mean a worse quality of life for many people, not just those who are the most vulnerable, but a lot of people are living in their own homes, concerned about antisocial behaviour, graffiti, all those sorts of things will be affected as well.
I think it's totally irrational. It's just going to plunge the city into deep debt.
And the rise of the council tax?
It was totally unnecessary. It could have been a council freeze.
So Tracey Simpson-Laing from the ruling Labour Party, you haven't listened to them either.
Well, if we take the point that Carol's made about planning for the future, that's why we've actually implemented a 2-year budget. The amendments that both Carol and Ian put through last night were 1-year budgets. That meant it was hiding the cuts that would actually happen next year. We're actually planning to modernise some of our services for people with learning disabilities, for older people, because that's what they're actually asking us for. On the debt that Ian's mentioned, we're having to take on the Housing Revenue Council debt. Now, that should have been taken on in 2010 when it was 89 million. Because they've actually messed around with it and changed government borrowing, it's now costing us 122 million. 32 million debt that because of the government we are taking on. So that's just hypocrisy from Councillor Gillis.
But people living in York were waking up this morning now knowing that they're going to be paying 2.9% more in their council tax. They're finding it hard. We heard on this programme yesterday, we heard from a group of mums, at a mums and toddlers group, who were saying they can't afford to pay anymore. We're cash-strapped. We don't go out. We can't afford to go out. One mum was moving away from the area simply because it was too expensive and they couldn't find work here. It's clearly going to have an impact on people.
But those same mums probably use the local children's centre. And they were probably getting some of their childcare in the local children's centre.
What about the mum who said, OK, fine, put the council tax up, but please make sure that my bins are emptied, because at the moment they're not?
Well, if she has a trouble that her bins aren't being emptied, then she needs to contact the council.
But that's part and parcel of what they're paying for, and if they're paying for it, they're not getting the job, they're not getting the services.
Well, the odd time bins get missed. I think we all know that. Bad weather, bin gets stuck on the back of the wagon. I lost my bin that way the other year. Then the rest of the street doesn't get done. So, people need to contact their councillors, contact the council if they aren't getting their recycling picked up on their bins. That's not anything to do with the cuts in services. That's the fact that there's been a hiccup in the system, and we need to know about that.
OK, well, thanks for joining us both in the programme this morning. Deputy Leader of the City of York Council, Tracey Simpson-Laing. We heard from Mark Bentley from York Stop the Cuts.